Okay, ladies and gentlemen, online and here in Bled, welcome to this panel on strengthening Europe against economic coercion. My name is Jonathan Hackenbroich. I'm a policy fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations, work on geoeconomic issues, and I'm very excited to be here and to be moderating this panel. And we're very much looking forward also to discussing with you. There will be 30 minutes of Q&A at the end of this debate. And our topic is based on the fact that we have entered a new great power competition. This one being very different than the last one, the last bloc confrontation. This one having at its core economics and using economics as weapons, if you will, as pressure tools for geopolitical gains. This is the premise on which we're basing this discussion today, and to us and for us at ECFR, this new world comes with a lot of new features, maybe mainly three. One is that from our point of view, globalization is changing. We all know the figures, and we all know that the global economy is changing. We have the rise of the East, but more generally, a wide array of countries is rising that intertwine politics and economics in very different ways and much more closely than the G7 economies, which are relatively losing weight in the global economy, and those countries and economies that promote and underpin liberal rules-based trade. The second defining feature is systemic rivalry with China in particular. So it's not just that we're seeing structural changes with a range of countries, but China in particular. And a third one which follows is that what we're seeing is an increasing use of strategic investments, state subsidies and SOEs, state-owned enterprises, and a range of tactics to further geopolitical influence through economics and through economic means. And particularly one development that we're seeing is economic coercion, which has made it into the US-EU summit conclusions that the US-EU want to tackle it jointly and get stronger against it. What is economic coercion? The use of economic threats and punishment, where businesses find themselves placed in between the geopolitical, right in the center of the geopolitical struggle, to achieve policy goals, to change EU policies, European policies, through economic pressure, to change other countries' policies, and so forth. And let me just give you a few examples. One very recent one from this month, Lithuania and Taiwan agreed to establish a mutual representative office. The one in Lithuania not being called Taipei Representative Office, but Taiwanese Representative Office, and China, at least reportedly, we don't yet know fully, but at least reportedly suspended rail freight to Lithuania as a direct punishment. Without calling it that, but de facto, this is very clear, and allegedly and reportedly, it was even in a report and a letter that the Baltic News Agency obtained. It said that due to the political tensions, we can't carry out these deliveries at the moment. The main and probably gravest example was against Australia. Where you could see Canberra first refusing Huawei to enter to build its 5G network, and then calling for an independent inquiry into the Wuhan outbreak of the pandemic, and all of a sudden seeing itself faced with an import curb on key Australian products in 13 sectors. 10% of Australian exports overall were curbed and couldn't go to China anymore. Clearly in reaction to an Australian policy stance that didn't change, but the economic cost was there, and the economic fallout. And this concerns the EU very directly as well, and we've seen, certainly with the latest Chinese sanctions in March, we tend to think of the personal sanctions, which of course were the main element, but right the same week in March, after the EU listed a few local officials for human rights abuses in Xinjiang, you could see H&M, Adidas, especially European companies, disappearing from e-commerce platforms, facing popular boycotts, which from our point of view is an increasingly common Chinese sanctions strategy, and clearly showing, especially with the communications that came from China, that China is willing to use economic pressure, as it has before, against Europeans to change policy stances or to punish Europeans for policy stances. And the big question is, I've mentioned other countries, and this is not something that's just coming from China. Russia threatened just a few months ago to ban Czech beer imports after the Czech government identified or declared that Russia was behind the 2014 warehouse explosions in the Czech Republic. And there's a long list of other things. So there's a danger from our point of view that we're entering an era where there could be an uncontrolled or an increasing use of such instruments, and that those who don't know how to respond are vulnerable and will not just lose economically, but also politically, or might have to choose between economic cost or political cost. And we can see that many of Europe's allies are adapting to this world, and what we want to do here today is discuss what does it mean for the EU and Europe, and I'm making both, I'm saying very specifically both, because we have a panel with various perspectives, and I'm very happy to introduce them to you now. Minister Kulhánek from the Czech Republic had to pull out because of an urgent commitment on short notice, but I'm very happy to be joined digitally from Prague by Deputy Minister for EU and International Trade of the Czech Ministry of Industry and Trade, Martina Tauberová. Thank you very much for joining us on short notice, and hello from Bled. Also very, thank you. Also very happy to be joined by Peter Potman from the Dutch government, he's Deputy Director General for Foreign Economic Relations at the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Thank you very much for joining us from The Hague. Hello, Peter. Then here in person, and very happy that he's here, Wolfgang Niedermark, member of the Executive Board, Federation of German Industries, BDI, after the two member states, for a business perspective on things, and not just any business perspective, but that of an exporting nation, and a very important one, of course. Then also here on the panel, and thank you very much for participating, Milan Roćen, who's a special advisor of the president of Montenegro, and who will be able to give us a neighborhood perspective and a Western Balkan perspective, which we thought was very important on this panel and in this setting, because needless to say, economic coercion is not just something that the EU is thinking about for itself, but also should at least, and is probably thinking also strategically what it means for its neighborhood and relations with close partner countries. Also joining us from Brussels, Marie-Pierre Vedrenne, who's a member of the European Parliament, and in the Committee on International Trade, the deputy head of the committee. Thank you very much, Marie-Pierre, for joining us. Very happy to see you on the panel. And finally, and certainly not last but not least, Denis Redonnet, Deputy Director General and Chief Trade Enforcement Officer, the new Chief Trade Enforcement Officer, even though he's been already the new Chief Enforcement Officer for quite some time now, but at DG Trade, who will be certainly telling us about some of what the Commission is working on at the moment in terms of what the EU needs as instruments and how we can react to economic threats and economic punishment. I think we're ready to start. We'll just go to explain you the order for this first part of the panel. We thought it might be best to go to the two member states first, to then hear from a business perspective, a neighborhood perspective, and then go to Brussels, to Marie-Pierre Vedrenne and Denis Redonnet to see if everything that we're hearing fits what the EU is currently working on, and what Parliament and the Commission's perspectives look like. So let me first go to Madam Deputy Minister Tauberova in Prague. This was an instant some time ago, of course, in 2014. We remember how Russia reacted to the EU's Ukraine sanctions with economic punishment against Eastern and Central Europeans, most notably Poland in that case. I've mentioned other examples. So let me first ask all of you on the panel, and first of all, Ms. Tauberova, what does the rise of global geoeconomics mean from your perspective? What's the perspective from Prague, and what does it mean for Europe?
Thank you very much, Jonathan, and thank you very much to all of you. I would like to say hello to all of you from Prague, and thank you. Indeed, it was a pleasure for me to step in on such a short notice, but to join this distinguished audience is a pleasure for me. Thank you. To your question, I think that what you have mentioned, Jonathan, in your introductory remarks, basically framing today's topic is absolutely valid, and that I think that even before the COVID-19, we have been witnessing, and we've witnessed that the free and fair trade and multilateral economic order with the global rules is under enormous and has been under enormous pressure, and that I can even say on a daily basis, and you have rightly also mentioned some concrete examples of some measures against the Czech Republic and also against other countries from Russia, but we are also witnessing on a daily basis growing measures and rivalry between the US and China, and with concrete steps. You mentioned also Australia, you mentioned also the measures of China against Lithuania. By the way, I would also join another example against the Czech Republic when last year the president of the Senate of the Czech Republic, Mr. Vystrčil, visited Taiwan. There were also some concrete steps we witnessed against our businesses on the Chinese market. Now, to your question, where is actually Europe in all this rivalry and geo-economic competition? I think that we can see that it is right in the middle of it, and that to a certain extent, we can even, and it is being described as a battlefield now on the internal market, because we have a lot of companies here globally operating. We have companies involved in the global supply chains, and also we have is a strategic asset of the 21st century, as Commissioner Breton very often describes it, and that is data. Very valuable data we have, and companies are willing and striving for gaining access. So what the pandemic, however, highlighted very much is that how vulnerable we are to all these economic coercive measures you described and mentioned, and that basically our ability to react and also to act autonomously is very limited. And therefore, when you ask about our position in the Czech Republic, we have therefore supported very much the revision of the EU trade policy, basically stressing really the need to have sufficient instruments and tools available to effectively defend ourselves, and with this also the rules-based economic order, which the Czech Republic is a strong advocate of, and together with the openness of the EU and of the liberal free trade. But we are very realistic in this, in understanding that the EU cannot basically remain open without actually having the sufficient tools at our disposal to effectively defend ourselves and to have the ability to have concrete options for an effective response. But I think that what is absolutely important is to really strike the right balance, because as we all understand, when debating the right adequate responses, to having the instruments, the right toolbox at our disposal, that we should really have on our mind the details, and to, as we all know, the devil is in details, as you can really imply this to everything, but to really have the right balance. And therefore, I think that it is no surprise that the Czech Republic, together with other like-minded countries, that we really are strong advocates of really calibrating very well the new tools we are now developing. I'll stop here because Denis will certainly talk more in detail about the concrete instruments, but I'd say that it is important to make the full use of the instruments we have at our disposal already. Well, let me mention the foreign direct investment screening mechanisms we are developing, and we've already launched our national mechanism in the Czech Republic this year. Also, the enforcement regulation is in place, so we should make the full use of this. But again, also to really find also additional tools which are now being together with the European Commission are now being elaborated. But we also should really be cautious of not to overweight basically our well-balanced and calibrated approach against the economic coercion. So what is really important, and we will stress it very much in the upcoming debate and also during the Czech presidency, which is going to be next year, the second half, that we should not give up our openness, that we should stick to the liberal values and not to resort to protectionism and undermining the rules-based international order. So to really need to have on first of all our mind is the credibility of the EU as the leading advocate of the multilateral trading system, but with all the pragmatic, realistic approach that we really need to have the instruments, but the right balance and the open cooperative approach to our partners is absolutely important to stick to, and to not to give up on diplomatic efforts first, to increase pressure on the hostile countries with countermeasures against us. To really first opt for engagement in dialogue and on the negotiated solutions, and also to use now the windows of opportunity to align with the United States and to increase our coordination even in this trade defense policy area. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Martina Tauberova, for this perspective from Prague and what this rise of geoeconomics means from your perspective. We'll go right over to the other member state government that's joining us, Peter Potman, from the Dutch perspective, and I'll say certainly who represents a country and economy that's certainly for all of Europe, that's the case, but certainly for the Netherlands even more, where trade is incredibly important. And so we're very much looking forward to your perspective, especially keeping in mind that sometimes the WTO, we've seen, for example, with regards to the measures China has taken against Australia, may not be able, because normally we would say the WTO is the forum where we can address some of these issues when there's punitive trade actions taken. But there is a question of, can the WTO respond quickly and efficiently in such areas, and or is it still enough to completely rely on the WTO when it comes to especially countries that are dependent on trade, and so we'll go over to Peter to The Hague for the perspective of what this all means from your perspective, please.
Well, thanks, Jonathan, and it's good to see you. And I hope everybody can hear me. I must say that over here, when the sound from your side was a bit tweaked, so I hope it's not the other way around, and everybody can hear me loudly and clearly.
We can hear you very well, yes.
Good. It's a pity I can't be there in person. I would have loved to travel, but it was a bit too complicated. But thanks to modern technology, we can have a fruitful exchange, even this far away from Bled. And thanks for the organizers and our Slovenian friends to put this on the agenda, because indeed it's a valid topic. And let me, in this first intervention, say a few things from our perspective on the rise of geoeconomics and on economic coercion. And then later on, I'll become a bit more specific on the second part. But indeed, I would say that from a strategic perspective, we're looking at a changing world order that we have to come to grips with, and we're moving from geopolitics to geoeconomics, from the Pax Americana, I would say, that for the Netherlands was a very handy concept in which we thrived, to what I would call comprehensive competition, while having to cooperate on global challenges to make it more complicated. And I believe there's two drivers to this change, and one is the rise of China, and we already discussed it, and we'll probably talk about it more. China's rising, its economy is growing, and therefore it's flexing its muscles, and it's leveraging its economic power. I think the other element that's driving this phenomenon is that the US and Afghanistan, is a perfect example, is getting wary of military adventures, and they've discovered that they can also apply power by leveraging the power of the dollar through sanctions. So they make increasing use of that tool to put pressure on us, on our companies, on our individual countries and other countries. So that being the case, and I don't see that changing very soon, means that we have to brace ourselves for this new world. Now, I think the good news, my third point, is that the EU is a geoeconomic power. So if this is the new world, in and of itself, I think we're not in a bad position. The EU, you could define as a geoeconomic project. And so I also have to say that we may not like what our Chinese and American friends are doing, but we Europeans do it ourselves. Our trade agreements, in a way, I wouldn't call them coercion, but they're certainly leveraging our economic power. GSP Plus, I think, is another example where we use our trade power to make political demands on friends and countries. I think in today's world, my fourth point is that the element where we are at a disadvantage is the EU is a legal treaty-based entity, and we're not a power in the traditional sense of the word. And that means that the EU is particularly bad at coercion, because it doesn't fit the model that we have. It doesn't fit our values, and so therefore, if coercion is the effect of this changing world order, then we do have a problem, particularly if it replaces the rule of law in the area of trade. And you mentioned, Jonathan, the WTO. Can they fix the problem? And I'm afraid at this point they cannot, simply because the WTO was constructed in the previous world order, assuming that everybody would play by the rules. But obviously we're seeing that it doesn't happen. So we have to come to grips with this and develop instruments, and I'll talk about that later on. My conclusion for now, what do we have to do then? Three things. One is we still have to invest in upholding the multilateral order, including the WTO, because the EU is not going to change its nature under the circumstances. I don't see that happening anytime soon. So we have to stick to what suits us best, which is the multilateral order. And then secondly, power derives from strength. And so if we strengthen our economy, and we become less vulnerable. And I think thirdly, and that should be the focus for today, we'll talk about it later, is to develop nimble policies to deal with coercion from other sides. And I think that we as EU should focus on dissuasion rather than deterrence, retaliation, because due to the nature of the EU, I don't think we'll be particularly good at going that route. So that is for now, how we look at this, and later on we'll come to talk about the specifics. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Peter, for this perspective from The Hague, and we'll turn now to Bled and to our panel, physical panel here. First to Wolfgang Niedermark, and I'll just add to what's been said. Peter mentioned US sanctions as well, just as one example of measures that actually directly target businesses and through a change of behavior of businesses aim to affect policies. And we could go into the details of all the different laws that China has put in place, not just the unreliable entities list that businesses can find themselves on, but at least in theory, so far it hasn't happened, but the new export control law, which has an extraterritorial dimension to it, which could be used to change trade flows with other countries, anti-foreign sanctions law, and a blocking statute, which is a perfect example for what we call sort of squeezing laws that could be used to punish European companies in China, or companies in China, in any case with European links to Europe, that comply with European or US sanctions. And so you could, as a business, you could find yourself in a situation where you don't know what to do, probably. But that's more of a question. What's the perspective from business, German business, but for probably many of the things are valid for European businesses in general. Wolfgang Niedermark from BDI, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jonathan, and I can really reassure you it's worthwhile traveling to Bled. It's a beautiful place. I didn't know that before, and it's good to be here face-to-face in the meetings as well. But the good news is, listening to your analysis and to what our government representative have said, the business segment and the companies more or less agree. That's not always the case, but of course we would share your view. Your wording, Jonathan, was relatively cautious about a changing world. From The Hague, we just heard there is a new world order coming up in China, where I was based the last 6 years. They all talk about the new era. This is disruption. We are now in a phase in interregnum. We do not know what's the next world order, but it will be really different to the old one. And of course, that is an analysis we don't like. So I'm happy to agree, but I'm disappointed that I have to. I spent my whole career in the old order, and in a very successful way, companies, international companies, in particular European and in particular German companies, profited from the good old multilateral rule-based order. And our hopes that when China joined WTO were extreme, and we were counting that this is a longer and a stable solution for our future perspectives. And now we have to, with a lot of regret, to confirm this analysis that this is broken. Dispute settlement doesn't work, and our concept of level playing field, we are not afraid of competition. Yeah, we are not afraid that China is a strong economic power, but of course we would like to be in this competition on a level playing field. We recently, that means the Federation of German Industry, published a list of requirements for a level playing field. And then if we go through this list on export controls and trade defense instruments and investment screening and all these matters, we now use the word reciprocity. Our concept before was that we are open in all these aspects and are in a way patient and wait and accept misbehavior from other countries. And now we are in a situation that we see, well, it doesn't work. It simply doesn't work. And we need to go into reciprocity. And today's topic, anti-coercion, is one of these elements in a longer list of different instruments. We have to be ready to apply. We don't like it to apply. Best case scenario would be that we don't need it, but we have to be prepared. So our answer to all these plannings is yes, go ahead. And that is in the interest of our companies as well, although on short notice that creates a lot of problems. Of course, we are exposed as companies to these coercions. We don't like it, but we have to deal with it, and I don't see a better way than preparing yourself. And another very important point is, of course, this moment of strength. Is Europe really strong enough and to be a big player in this new game, in this new era? Some people in China and elsewhere might have the impression that we are not. In China, they are very clear about it. The West is going down the drain. That is chaos. And we have to prove that that's wrong. And we have to work with next generation EU and all these, and innovation and technology and cooperation with our transatlantic partners, that we are still strong enough to be a serious player in this game. If we are not, then of course all these means are useless. It can only be working when we are strong. And we are only strong if we are economically successful. And then this is a circle. Of course, we have to be still in China, in Russia, and elsewhere. We cannot decouple. So this is really a difficult situation we are in. So we are not strong enough to decouple, but of course we want to go into reciprocity and take a risk of conflicts as well. But we, of course, need to strive for cooperation as well. And to get this into the right balance is a challenge for all of us, governments and companies and their representatives. And that will be really interesting times. I think we are already at the bottom of this development. There's more to come. It will be even more complicated. Look at Taiwan or what can happen. I don't want to speculate on that, but I think we are not yet at the bottom of this development. Yeah.
Thank you very, very much, Wolfgang Niedermark. Gloomy outlook, but also you already touched on some of the guiding principles for a response, and you mentioned also one instrument, anti-coercion instrument, which we'll hear about more when we go to our colleagues and to the representatives joining us from Brussels. But first, now to complete the picture as well, before going to Brussels, a very important perspective, Mr. Roćen, would like to give you the floor to understand better what is the perspective from a EU neighborhood country, Western Balkans most notably. I mean, this forum, half of all conversations I feel like have been about China and the Western Balkans, or in any case, what China means for this region. So we're very much looking forward to hearing your thoughts and your perspective, please.
Hvala vam. Prvo zahvaljujem organizatorima na pozivu da učestvujem na ovom važnom panelu.
I would like to take the organizers first for the invitation to participate in this important panel.
Ja ne govorim engleski, ja govorim ruski. Možda je na ovu temu trebalo govoriti na ruskom ili možda još bolje na kineskom.
Well, I don't speak English and I apologize, but I speak Russian, and maybe it is a better language to be used when we discuss this topic, and maybe Chinese would be the best.
Pitam se otkud ja na ovom panelu, ja nisam ekspert za ekonomska pitanja.
And I keep wondering how come that I am here in this panel. I am not an expert for economic issues at all.
Sva moja veza sa ekonomijom je bila ta kad sam bio mlad kao mnogi vi od vas u ovoj sali. Bio sam novinar ekonomske politike, tada veoma utjecajnog nedeljnika u onoj Titovoj Jugoslaviji.
Well, all the connections that I have with economics was long time ago when I was young, as many people are in this room, and I was a journalist, and I was a reporter for the Politika, which is the very influential paper in former Yugoslavia in Tito's time, and it was the column about economics at that time.
A za novinare kažu da su univerzalne neznalice i ja sam dakle iz tog milja, pa ću sa tog nivoa govoriti o ovoj temi.
You know, people, when they talk about journalists, they say that they are universal, not know-how. So this is the perspective that I will take about this topic.
Ali možda ovo i nije novo nešto u Europskoj uniji, da o važnim pitanjima govore ljudi koji se u ta pitanja baš i ne razumiju.
But maybe it is not a new thing in European Union that important issues are discussed by the people that don't really understand those issues very well.
Juče smo slušali raspravu o budućnosti Europe na liderskom nivou. Isto tako i o budućnosti Balkana na liderskom nivou.
Yesterday we heard discussions about the future of Europe on the leaders level and also about the future of the Balkans also on the level of leaders.
Ja mislim da je ovo tema par excellence za liderski nivo i to iza zatvorenih vrata. Za početak.
And I think this particular topic that we are discussing here today is actually the topic par excellence for the level of the leaders. And I think that for the beginning they should discuss this behind the closed doors.
Čitajući zapadnu štampu i slušajući razne priče iz Europe i iz Amerike u posljednje vrijeme, stiče se utisak da smo mi tek sad otkrili Kinu koja ima 1,4 milijarde stanovnika ili Rusiju koja ima 17,5 miliona kvadratnih kilometara.
You know, reading the Western press media in Europe and in the United States, you can get an impression that it's only now that we revealed and discovered that there is a China which has 1,400,000,000 people living there, or that there is a Russia there which has 17 million square kilometers.
Sad svjedočimo o stvarenju prognoze Napoleona koji je prije više od 100 godina rekao pustite Kinu neka spava, kad se probudi zadrhtat će cijel svijet.
You know, we are now seeing something that Napoleon actually predicted hundreds of years ago. He said, let China sleep, but when China wakes up, the entire globe will shake.
To je ipak jedna druga civilizacija i kultura koja je vrijeme računa na milenijume, a ne kao mi u Europi želimo sve danas.
You know, that's a different culture actually and different civilization, and we have to take this in mind. They count time in millennia. They don't want to have everything now and this moment like we want in Europe.
Možda Kinezima najbolje pristoji ona arapska izreka vi imate satove, mi imamo vrijeme.
You know, maybe the best proverb to describe Chinese is the Arab proverb when they say, well, you have the watches, but we have the time. And now their time has come.
Prije nekoliko godina na festivalu ekonomije u Trentu američki nobelovac Mike Spence je rekao da svjetska ekonomija izgleda stabilno, mada je u stvari katastrofalna.
You know, in the Festival of Economy in Trent a couple of years ago, Mike Spence, the American Nobel Prize winner, said that global economy seems to be stable, but that in fact it is in a disastrous shape.
Niko ne zna da li se svijet nalazi pred 100-godišnjom stagnacijom.
Nobody knows if the world is currently faced with the 100-year-long stagnation now.
Prije nekoliko godina na ekonomskom forumu u Davosu učestvovao je kineski lider Xi Jinping, prvi put poslije 2003. godine.
A couple of years ago, in the Economic Forum in Davos, Xi Jinping, the Chinese leader, participated for the first time after 2003.
I on je bio na tom skupu jedan od najgorljivijih zagovornika globalizma, dok su lideri iz prestolnica koje su kolijevke globalizma više govorili o državnom intervencionizmu.
And Xi Jinping was actually the one who advocated the most loudly globalism, while the leaders of globalism from other capitals, from Europe and the rest of the world, actually were talking about the state protectionism or interventionism. Sorry.
Danas govorimo o sankcijama Kine prema Europskoj uniji i prema Australiji.
And now we are mentioning sanctions that China imposed on European Union and on Australia.
Govorimo o instrumentima koje imaju na raspolaganju pojedine zemlje da zaštite svoju ekonomiju.
And we are talking about the instruments that certain countries have at their disposal to protect economy.
Ili da se prilagode toj novoj politici.
Or to adapt to the new policy that is our reality.
Znate, ja dolazim iz zemlje koja je 90-ih bila pod najžešćim sankcijama ikada. Pod sankcijama Ujedinjenih nacija 3 pune godine iz bivše Savezne Republike Jugoslavije. Tada je Crna Gora bila sastavni dio Miloševićeve Jugoslavije.
You know, I come from Montenegro. It is the country that used to be within the former Yugoslavia, which was under the Milošević reign at that time. And in the 90s, we were under the strictest sanctions of the United Nations ever. And we were under such sanctions for 3 years.
I znamo da su sankcije pogubne za ekonomiju.
And we are well aware that sanctions are devastating for an economy.
Uništile su ekonomiju u Srbiji i Crne Gore, ali nikakve političke posljedice Milošević od toga ni njegov režim nisu imali.
You know, those sanctions actually completely destroyed the economy of Serbia and Montenegro, which was former Yugoslavia at the time. However, Milošević didn't actually suffer any kind of political consequences because of those economic sanctions.
Nego je nakon toga od tog istog zapada proglašen za faktor stabilnosti na Balkanu.
But instead of that, after those sanctions, the same person, Milošević, was proclaimed by the same entities from the West as a factor of stability in the Balkans.
Ne isključujem da će to što sada Rusi zovu kolektivni zapad, a to je termin koji je prvi put u aprilu ove godine Putin upotrijebio na godišnjem obraćanju u Državnoj dumi.
Well, then I don't exclude that something that is called by the Russians the collective West, which is the term used for the first time by Putin in the Russian Duma in April this year.
Znači, zajednički jezik i sa Putinom i sa Xi Jinpingom.
So I don't exclude that this collective West, as they call it, will find a common language with Putin and with Xi Jinping.
Navešću vam 2 primjera kako Zapad, kad ima svoj interes, gleda na vladavinu prava.
I will just give you 2 examples to show how the West actually sees the rule of law if they have certain interest in that. And this is related actually to the United States.
Sjećate se ubistva Georgea Floyda, onog crnca koga je ubio bijeli policajac u Americi.
You remember the murder of George Floyd, the police officer, white police officer that killed George Floyd.
Američka policija je tražila 2 ljudi koji su izazvali kasnije nerede i požare u Minnesoti. Znate kako su ih našli? Koristeći najnoviju savremenu kinesku tehnologiju kompanije koja se nalazi na crnoj listi američke vlade.
And the American police was looking for 2 persons who caused unrest after this murder and who caused fires and problems. And do you know how they found them? Well, they actually used the most modern technology of a Chinese company that is on the black list in the United States.
Prošle godine.
So that happened last year.
Korporacija američkih preduzeća obratila se direktno južnokorejskom predsjedniku da pomiluje bivšeg predsjednika kompanije Samsung koji se nalazi na izdržavanju zatvorske kazne zbog korupcije.
You know, the American Corporation Association actually requested from the South Korean president to impose or to give amnesty to the president of the Samsung company who was in prison because of corruption.
Zašto?
And why actually they requested that?
Zato što Samsung treba da uloži nekoliko milijardi dolara u proizvodnju mikroprocesora koji su danas najtraženija roba na svjetskom tržištu.
And why did they do that? Because Samsung was supposed to invest a couple of billion of dollars into production of certain microprocessors that are the most demanded in the American market.
Vi se bolje od mene razumijete u ova pitanja.
I'm sure you know much better about these issues than I do, but...
Kancelarka Merkel se pitala kako to da zemlja sa takvom automobilskom industrijom ne može da obezbedi proizvodnju te komponente mikroprocesora.
Ms. Merkel asked herself and wondered why and how a country with such a car industry cannot ensure the production of such microprocessors.
Znate ko su najveći proizvođači?
You know who the greatest producers are?
Južna Koreja, Tajvan,
South Korea, Taiwan,
Kina.
and China lately.
1990. godine Evropa je proizvodila 40% ukupne proizvodnje procesora u svijetu.
In 1990s, Europe was producing 40% of the total amount of processors in the world.
a danas ni 10%.
And now they are not producing even 10%.
Nedavno je Evropski komesar za nove tehnologije izjavio da je cilj da Europska unija 2030. godine dostigne proizvodnju od 20%.
Recently, European Commissioner said that the goal is that European Union or Europe will produce 20% of this production by 2030. And without microprocessors,
bez poluprovodnika, ovi naši pametni telefoni ne znači ništa.
And without semiconductors, our smart telephones don't work.
Nije automobili, ne samo
cars don't work.
Automobili na struju, nego novi tipovi automobila. 40% vrijednosti novih automobila je elektronika.
You know, 40% of the value of the new cars is in the electronics. So these things don't work without the microprocessors and semiconductors. Just one sentence.
Nedavno je Senat SAD donio zakon kojim se izdvajaju 52 milijarde da se uloži u proizvodnju mikroprocesora.
Recently, the Senate of the USA voted for the law to invest 50 billion into the production of microprocessors.
A Južna Koreja planira za 10 godina narednih da uloži 450 milijardi.
And South Korea plans in the following 10 years to invest 450 billion.
I da vam kažem samo za Balkan.
And just one sentence about the Balkans.
Okay. Just one sentence.
Samo za Balkan jednu rečenicu. Mi nismo susjedstvo.
We are not your neighborhood.
Mi smo dio europskog kontinenta.
We are a part of the European continent.
Nema Europske unije, nema budućnosti Europske unije bez Balkana u Europskoj uniji.
There is no future of the European Union without the Balkans in.
Mi smo zaostala ekonomija.
But unfortunately, we are the economy that lags behind.
Ako bi se Balkan razvijao po sadašnjoj stopi,
if we were to develop according to the development rate that we have now,
Europska unija narednih decenija po stopi od 1%,
and if European Union economy developed in the next decade at a rate of 1% only,
mi bi dostigli Europsku uniju 1102. godine.
Then we would reach European Union in 2102.
Kina je ušla u taj slobodni prostor na Balkan.
And China actually filled in that open space in the Balkans.
Oni ne postavljaju nikakve ideološke niti bilo kakve druge uslove.
They don't put any conditions in terms of ideological conditions or anything.
Za razliku od Evrope i Amerike.
Unlike the United States and Europe.
Znate, onu kinesku čuvenu nije važno da li je mačka crna ili bijela, važno je da lovi miševe.
You know, the Chinese proverb says it's not really important whether the cat is black or white. It's important that it catch mice.
A za naše prijatelje iz Evropske unije izgleda je važno je li mačka crna ili bijela.
And for our friends from European Union, it's very important if the cat is black or white.
Thank you very much, Mr. Roćen. Thank you very much for important points, sanctions efficacy, on European strength, on the question of China filling a gap in the Western Balkans. We'll go over to Brussels now and see what this all sounds like from there. And we'll just go first to Marie-Pierre Vedrenne, who's in the Trade Committee, and that has been particularly active on thinking about instruments that Europe needs to respond to this rise of geoeconomics. And Marie-Pierre, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jonathan. I hope you can hear me and see me. And sorry for trouble technologic, but
very well.
Thank you for your invitation. And even if it's since Brussels, I'm very happy to be with you. The current context is really clear, and a lot of things are already mentioned. But I think that we are facing two main challenges: the deadlock of the multilateral system and the rise of unilateral measures contrary of international law and again the EU interest and rights. And it's already mentioned, but since its creation, the European Union has always been an open continent and a strong believer in free trade. And free trade shouldn't mean anarchy or chaos, but on the contrary, rules followed by everyone. And unfortunately, today, the multilateral system is completely blocked, especially since more than a year and a half in December, the World Trade Organization appellate body is completely blocked due to the United States refusal to appoint new judges. And since then, it has been unable to rule a new appel and has completely paralyzed the World Trade Organization dispute settlement system. And on the other hand, even our supposed close partner, adopt coercive and unilateral measures against the EU interest. So first, I would like to have some words about United States, because there is a lot of things said already about China, but I think that it's also important that we don't forget that, of course, Biden is not Trump, but the extraterritorial effect of US sanction or the 301 section will still be there. And I would like to put here the emphasis of the extraterritorial effect of the US sanction. Denis Redonnet knows that it's an important subject for me. And this situation dates back to the 19th and long before the Trump administration. And the new Democrat administration in the White House is unlikely to change that. So the United States take advantage of its legislation to deviate from its main goal and impose on everyone, European included, their goal. So this has been going on for more than 20 years, and the result is clear, not to say anything. American sanctions against Iran or Cuba have illicit extraterritorial effect on our European companies, which they respect international law. $7 billion in fine have been demanded, for example, from French company as PSA or Airbus. And the justification is that their commercial practice, their customer or some of their payment did not comply with American law. Even so, none of this practice was illegal and not direct connection to the territory of United States. So this is clearly economic coercion against Europe. And for me, the European Union is not up to the task, and it does not have enough effective levers to fight against the illegality of this American provision. And of course, like I said, we already mentioned China, and which is also strengthening its trade policy by equipping itself with the necessary tools to take unilateral measures. And in the context of the COVID crisis, China did not hesitate to take illegal coercive measures against Australia, and we denounced Chinese policy, and thus violating any rule of bilateral trade agreements. So some boycott practice in China or in Turkey against European goods and services are also a reality. So it's not, I think, about launching trade war, but on the contrary, defending a trade based on the rules, and rules that everyone must obey. And it is time to let our partner to understand that we are finally going to play on a level playing field, like already mentioned. This is a real issue, I think, of credibility of the European Union, but also of sovereignty. And after, I think that we have the possibility to more discuss about the new tool, but I think it's very important that we move forward on all this topic.
Thank you very much, Marie-Pierre, also for the conciseness of the statement. And we'll be coming to that now, to the instrument that you just mentioned. But of course, coupled with the first question that I asked each panelist, what does the rise of geoeconomics mean from your perspective? We'll go over to Denis Redonnet from DG Trade, Chief Enforcement Officer of the EU, and with this question, but then also the question, we know that the EU is working on another tool. We have an instrument, the anti-coercion instrument. What does that mean? Maybe in a half a sentence, what we can read already is it's about deterring economic coercion, so the EU being able to take a countermeasure in case someone punishes Europeans economically. But we'll get the details now, and then we'll tie in the audience and do a second round that combines the second question and reactions to the anti-coercion instrument, as well as to questions from the audience. Please, Denis Redonnet.
Well, thank you very much, Jonathan, and thank you very much for this invitation to the forum. Okay, well, let me try then to move us along in this direction as you suggest. Let me just, though, first say in response a bit more to the first part of the question and the discussion, that viewed from the Commission, this issue of dealing with economic coercion, phenomena of and manifestations of economic coercion, which can be diverse, indeed are probably one aspect and an important aspect of this broader issue of navigating a more adverse, frankly, in some respects, a more hostile geo-economic world. And all this is indeed at the heart of how we're trying to adapt our set of EU-level policies, including in the trade and investment area. And this is why we have reviewed the conduct of the common commercial policy of the European Union around the concept of open strategic autonomy, because the EU is an open economy, will remain an open economy connected to the rest of the world that relies on trade and investment. And we need that both for economic reasons, of course, recovering from the pandemic, remaining competitive, but also for geopolitical reasons. It is only because we are integrated in the international economy that we are going to be able to shape global solutions in line with our interests and our values. So I would not overestimate and overemphasize this divergence and dichotomy between the geopolitical and the geo-economic. There are some elements and zones where they connect very clearly and positively. But it is true that we're doing this. We're conducting these policies in the EU and for the EU in a context of increasing geopolitical tensions, in a context where it is true that we have come to the view that a number of international players can weaponize trade and investment. And we have to be conscious of that, and we have to decide whether there is a need for a response to this. All this takes place in a very clear, degraded context, which some of the speakers have highlighted. This fundamental erosion, chipping away of the multilateral rules-based trading system, with the WTO at its center, losing its centrality, with a threat to the primacy of international economic law. That is a fact. That is the situation right now. We have gone backwards compared to where we were several years ago in this specific area. Great power rivalry, and in particular, this fundamental question for us and for many countries in the world of whether or not the US and China are going to be able to manage their relationship going forward under or inside, anchored in a multilateral system, or whether they're going to take this outside of any kind of multilateral and rules-based system. That is a fundamental geo-economic and geopolitical question for us, and one of concern. And a situation where we are seeing the growing importance of this nexus of issues which combine trade, technology, data, and national security issues. And this is a world, a zone, where obviously the traditional tools in the area of trade and investment policies are falling slightly short. And that's why there are now developments at EU level. I'm thinking, for example, about the cooperation framework for foreign direct investment screening for national security and public order reasons. And all this creates a space where we are concerned that we can be faced with situations where third countries could decide that they want to try to shape future legislative initiatives, for example, at EU level or for member states, dissuade the EU or dissuade member states from introducing the measures that they want, we would want to introduce, exercising our regulatory sovereignty by, for example, introducing or threatening to introducing additional trade tariffs, delaying or refusing authorizations needed to do business. We see all this. All this is at play today. And all this would constitute undue interference in our domestic affairs. And as such, would be, from our point of view, a breach of public international law, and therefore could justify an instrumental response from the EU. So that's first point. Second point, briefly, which I perhaps want to throw in conversation now, is that there cannot be an isolated response on the trade and trade policy side only, obviously. This is a fairly broad issue. multifaceted, and it has to be, any response on trade has to be part of a broader effort and response in terms of the resilience of the EU as a political union and the EU as an economy. And that's why there are responses that can be brought into the trade and investment space. We'll come to this in a minute, and I've mentioned some of them already. We have traditional trade protection tools which we use, but of course it requires looking at this from the point of view of other policies at EU level, industrial policy, and the question of vulnerability of our supply chains more generally above and beyond trade policy considerations, or finance. In the area of finance, the Commission has also adopted in January a blueprint setting out a number of actions to promote the international role of the euro, for example, and to ensure a more robust financial infrastructure. And it's very clear that the different silos of trade, finance, and norms are going to be at play in this whole discussion about navigating a geoeconomic world. The third point, which I wanted just to maybe bring in now quickly, is this idea that, of course, this is responsive. I mean, we are not the ones that are lighting the fire on this question of the weaponization of trade and investment. Our interest is that there is no coercion and that we have a world of trade and investment that functions without coercion. I would slightly perhaps nuance or not disagree, because I understand what you were saying, but perhaps say something different from what Peter was saying earlier. We do leverage the strength of the internal market in our trade relationships. But of course, we do this in the context of, more often than not, apart if you're talking about additional incentives through unilateral preferences, but in trade agreements, we do this, of course, in a negotiated treaty-based framework for reciprocal agreements. And we usually, through our trade agreements, promote export, I would say, not individual EU interests, but very often, and most often, global standards, which we actually help to support through our trade policy. So that's very different, obviously, from the issue of punitive coercion, which we believe is potentially at play. And the question, therefore, is vis-a-vis that, which is new, relatively new and prevalent, and frankly, in our view, can concern many different countries in the world. Do we need to equip ourselves with specific instruments, and possibly in the trade space? So there, the Commission has actually taken the view, and President von der Leyen has made this very clear to Council and Parliament, that the Commission will bring forward a proposal for a trade-based instrument to respond to the problem of economic coercion specifically. And of course, the key will be to devise, and this will be the work, of course, of the Commission proposing legislation in a few months, and then of the co-legislators going forward in the EU, to devise and I combine something that both Martina and Peter have said, a well-calibrated and nimble instrument. What does that mean? That means, of course, that ideally, this instrument should in fact not be used. The idea here is to actually find an instrument that will help to depoliticize trade and investment relations and act as a deterrent. That is the primary objective of a proposal of this kind. But of course, to get to that result, any instrument at EU level would have to be credible and would have to be effective. It means, in our view, that we would need a fairly broad range of measures to be available to ensure that action can be effective. It requires flexibility in the design of an instrument of this kind, because what might be effective today to deal with specific types of practices might not be effective in a few years' time. As these things, the shape of these types of practices evolves over time. We see new forms of coercion appearing all the time, whether very directly linked to state or less directly linked to the state. And therefore, it should also be an instrument that is designed in a way so that the process for acting under the instrument is not too cumbersome or its outcome too uncertain, so that the third countries concerned will not feel the pressure of the instrument as a deterrent. Now, very difficult for me to say much more now. I can come back perhaps still in the half hour that we have left. We've had a full public consultation on this. We have not put forward the proposal for the legislative instrument yet, and that will be the subject of a lot of work in the coming months, first inside the Commission and then obviously among the co-legislators. The consultation, the process that we have had for devising the ideas underpinning an instrument have thrown up a number of considerations, including through public consultation. I mean, first, it's very clear from our assessment that the scope of such an instrument has to be relatively broad because it has to capture all relevant types of economic coercion, be it informal, be it silent forms of coercion. So the question of scope will be very important. The question of the swiftness,
Denis, if you could take a maximum of 1 more minute, please.
Yeah, I'll come to the end. I just wanted to give you maybe some elements in terms of where we might want to go with an actual instrument. The other issue is the question of remedy, of what do we do, how do we act? And there, I think the idea is that we would have to find a way to create an instrument which would be able to act swiftly, because again, the more flexible the instrument, the greater its deterrence effect. So I think that's where we are right now here inside the Commission. These are the things that I can say to you in terms of where we are in terms of preparing for a proposal, specifically in the trade space, specifically on this issue of economic coercion, which clearly has emerged as an important priority of work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Denis, and thank you to everyone. I want to open up and come to the audience, see if there are questions. We've touched on a number of issues on economic coercion. I've heard also some resonance on when we touched on the topic of the Western Balkans. If you want to, we'll bundle a few questions and then go back to the panelists and give each of them probably something like 2 or 3 minutes to react on the question of what should Europe do? What do we need to do? And Denis just outlined this anti-coercion instrument, which very concretely you could see, the way I understand it, you could see the EU taking a counter tariff or an investment restriction as a countermeasure if there is an attack, if you will, an economic pressure, economic punishment being used against one of the member states, several member states, and so forth. And this will be coming member states to decision makers in member states sometime soon when the Commission proposes it. On this, on Western Balkans, the questions that Mr. Niedermark and others touched upon of the need for being strong ourselves, European strength, having strong economies, also in the Western Balkans where others are filling the gap. If there are any questions on these or related topics, we'll start in the front and then make our way to the back.
Jonathan, if I may, quickly, just one remark from Prague, from me. I'm sorry to interrupt, but my readiness to step in for our foreign minister, as I indicated last night, was unfortunately only for 1 hour until 12 o'clock. So I really hate to leave you, this distinguished audience. I really apologize for that, but I have unfortunately a meeting which I was not able to reschedule on such a short notice. So I apologize. I thank you very much to all of you, to other participants in the distinguished panel. Thank you very much for today's discussion, and I'm looking forward to continue our discussion on other platforms and in other events. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you very much, Ms. Taborova. Thanks for joining on such short notice. Please.
Gracias. Many thanks for the panel, many thanks for the topic, extremely important. I'm assuming that in this difficult global landscape, Europe needs to work with 2 legs. One is to develop these stronger instruments to defend its strategic autonomy. Second leg is to develop, update the multilateral instruments in different areas. trade, finance, and I would say digital. On trade, Europe is quite powerful. On finance, could be more powerful, building on euro. On digital, Europe is lagging behind, clearly. This is the situation we have. So my question for the panel is, we need a comprehensive agenda to work with these two legs and making a particular effort on the digital, because we are late, and if we are late on the digital, we'll be late everywhere. My second point is about Balkans, because the speaker from Montenegro, I think he was very clear. In this global landscape, Europe cannot afford to have an ambiguous position regarding Balkans. Western Balkans is part of Europe. And we need to deal with this swiftly, because we'll pay a high price if we go on with an ambiguous position. And I'm from Portugal. Huh? I work in Brussels, I'm a Portuguese, but I understand this completely. Balkans should be in.
Thank you very much. Two important questions on comprehensive agenda and the Balkans. We'll go first to the back because we were first, and then third one, and then fourth, and then we'll come back to the panel. And if you could...
sure, I'm Martin Ugorsti with the Institute for Foreign Affairs and Trade in Budapest. When the US started to worry about China and President Trump did what he did, the US-China trade took a nosedive. Now we're having a similar discussion in Europe, whereas EU-China trade has been growing, including European exports to China. And when people ask me in different events why Europe cannot be more tougher on China, I tell them that go ask BDI whether they are ready to pay for that. So my question to Mr. Niedermark would be, is the German economy ready to pay for Europe being more tougher on China? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Clear question to one of the panelists. Next, in the back, please, and then we'll come to you in the front. And if you could introduce yourself.
Yes, hello, I'm Mark Plesko. I consider myself a true European. I was born in Yugoslavia, raised in Germany, worked in Italy, live in Slovenia, do business all over Europe and the United States, and those who know me can confirm that. And I'm a simple businessman, like probably Mr. Niedermark. I just want to work and do business. And I think as Mr. Roćen so eloquently expressed, I feel, as a European, and he being just a West Balkan man, apparently, I can be a little bit more direct and say, aren't we hypocritical Europeans? I mean, he said it, but he didn't use this word, right? We made the rules, we imposed the rules with our strength onto others, and now we are complaining that they don't play by these rules, number one. Number two, we are imposing our ideology. And by the way, I like European ideology. I am all for human rights, democracy. I love to live here in this country. But to be honest, other people, other civilizations have different values, different ideologies. So do we have the right to impose our ideology on the others? Maybe we do if we have the strength like the United States. But I think as Europeans, we should be more realpolitik. And now I'm asking you this question. Should we combine, and you mentioned geopolitical and geoeconomics. There's also geo-ideology that I would like to add. Should we use our ideology? We started with sanctions because other countries didn't follow our European ideals. Should we do that? Or should we say, look, we're in for the business, and I have to say, I like the German approach, realpolitik. So is this the right approach, or should we be more ideological? And then, as the colleague before said, are we willing to pay the price for that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now last question up here in the front. Mike is coming.
I'm Momčilo Radulović. I'm president of European Movement of Montenegro. And I used to be a speaker here, and there was a bunch of people, more than 400 people here. We had a standing ovations after my speech, and they didn't invite me, since I was very critical about EU. So, Mr. Roćen, you will never be invited again to speak. So, no, I'm still quite critical, even though I'm supporting membership of Montenegro to EU more than 20 years, 25, let's say. And I was very young when I started, you know. Now I'm older, fat and bald, you know, so I'm just wondering if my kids are going to get the chance to live normally in the EU. And why? Because we have a double standards from EU all the time. And generally it could be phrased as, don't do as I do, do as I tell you. And we are fed up with that. We are fed up with that. So, in short, Montenegrin government was asking for more than 10 years the loan from EU countries and EU financial institutions for this famous motorway. And the answer was always no. One ambassador from EU 10 years ago told me, why do you need a motorway? And you don't want to hear my answer to him. Because this kind of hypocrisy is constantly in politics of EU towards Western Balkan countries, especially towards small countries like Montenegro. So if we continue like this, to have double standards all the time, then you will have the situation where Russia and Turkey have the highest number of investment, for example, in Montenegro, in this moment.
Very important perspective. What's your question? Just so.
So I'm just asking, when we will have a policy of double standards being changed into something real? Because if you think that you will be understood seriously from China and Russia or Turkey, when you cannot deal with your belly, and the Western Balkans is the belly of Europe, when you cannot interfere into your internal affairs and deal with them, I think this is something which is not leading Europe or whoever else anywhere. Just one sentence from Edi Rama yesterday.
The question,
one sentence is, European policy now is led by nationalism and public polls. If we don't have idealism leading us, we'll go nowhere. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There was one question directly addressed to Mr. Niedermark here, so I might give you the floor first to react to all of it in 2 minutes, and then we'll go to Peter Potman.
I can give a simple question. Yes, we are ready to pay for that, and we are well aware that this is not for free. We have a new setting here, and you feel the emotion about the differences in political views. That's why we are proposing for a very pragmatic coexistence. Let's accept that there are countries like Russia and China who have a different system, who have a different set of values, and we are not striving for regime change. We accept that there is a very ugly totalitarian communist party. We don't like it, but we accept it. But we have to draw red lines. It's not. It's important whether the cat is is white or black. At least it should not be red. And we cannot accept certain behaviors where we see real offenses of what we think are our Western values. It's not acceptable to have camps, education camps in Xinjiang with minorities. It's a long row of things we have to criticize, even though we would say, let's coexist. But that must be a responsible coexistence. And responsible means that we stick to our values, driven by our media, by our critical consumers, by our youth, by our financial sector driving us in this direction, and most important, by the next generation of leaders who are asking different questions. And that's, I can only recommend it. I don't go into detail. We have published this paper in English language, Responsible Coexistence. And that's our concept, and that will be costly, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Niedermark, for clear words. Peter Potman in the Netherlands. One question was about a comprehensive agenda. Maybe you want to touch on that, but your reactions on what we need to do, please.
Yeah, excellent. And looking at the time which is slipping away, let me also very briefly respond to Denis and the issue of what's next. But so, you know, the EU should stand on two legs, I think the first question put forward. And I agree. We need stronger instruments because, as I said earlier on, we live in a different world. So we have to adapt to that. And in that sense, that is what we set out to do, to deal with the coercive effects of policies of others. Secondly, indeed, we should develop multilateral instruments. I also said that, strengthen trade, and the EU has unified command on trade, so that I think is good to go. Finance, I would indeed call on ourselves in the Commission to further develop ideas to strengthen the role of the euro, because if you look at the US, I mean, they have a very powerful military, but in this realm of coercion and geoeconomics, it is the power of the dollar that gives them strength, not so much the power of their companies or the overall size of their economy. It's the dollar. So we should beef up the role of the euro. The digital agenda is part and parcel, I would think, of strengthening our economy. You know, digital, AI, those are the technologies and vectors of the future. And so we need them to grow stronger. Perhaps briefly, I would second the point made by Wolfgang in response to the Hungarian question, you know, are we ready to pay? And the Dutch government is ready to pay. We realize, and I like this phrase, I mean, it matters what the color of the cat is. And so there has to be a sensible mix between realpolitik. I mean, we have to accept the world as it is, but we cannot accept to live in that and just take everything for granted that we find. Values are important for the EU. And that relates to how we should go about developing these policies. We have to realize that we are a law-based geopolitical entity. And that we don't have a unified government at this point. We don't have a unified military. We have a unified trade command. But so if we go down the road that the Chinese and perhaps the Americans might be going, we will be at a disadvantage. So let's be indeed nimble, you know, strengthen ourselves, but also keep pushing for the things that give us strength, which is a multilateral order, which is standards, which is values. If we give this up, sorry, we stand to lose because we are not like the Chinese and the Americans, this unified entity. One element that I would, that we're grappling with, and I personally am, is that as we develop these anti-coercion measures, one of the things we run up to is that, you know, the Commission, I don't think, can be easily coerced because they're powerful. So where is Europe vulnerable? We're vulnerable because we have a lot of small countries, and these small countries are left by themselves to deal with Chinese measures against the country, like Lithuania, or against the companies. Many of our countries have this. And this is a very complicated matter because, you know, to what extent is the EU collectively embracing the interests and the positions of individual member states and individual companies? I don't have the answer, but I believe we have to take this into account as we go along, because this is where the rubber meets the road. Our companies suffer and countries are squeezed. And so how do we balance the sovereignty and the moral hazard aspects of that with a collective response that makes us stronger? So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter Potman. I will just give Marie-Pierre Vedrenne the floor next. She was shortest, really short before, so I want to give her the floor, and then Mr. Roćen as well, of course. But Marie-Pierre.
Thank you, Jonathan. Maybe let me focus on anti-coercion and about the necessity to design this instrument. First, about the scope. Denis has already mentioned some aspects, but I think that it's very important to manifest illegal and unilateral measures will fall out the scope of the World Trade Organization. I do not want to put the EU out of the multilateral order. Of course, it's very important to be coherent, but the EU is at the front of defending multilateralism all the time. So, however, the EU cannot be always a naive partner. We must demonstrate to our partners that now we want to play on equal terms. So on the scope, and I already mentioned extraterritorial effect of source country, I think we have some tools, but it's not really effective. So I think that it's important to be very focused on the scope. Of course, we need to see the scope of the countermeasure. Also, it's very important to work on goods or public procurement, but also on services and intellectual property rights. We work a lot on enforcement regulation previously on this subject. And also, I think it's important to have a large possibility because it's about our credibility and we need to be credible. And third aspect, to evaluate how this instrument will work concretely. We already mentioned this aspect, so I think that it's very important to work on the proportionality of the measure, on consulting the stakeholder, but also involve the European Parliament and the member states. It's not a commission-only prerogative. Denis Redonnet mentioned that we need to depolitize the trade policy. I agree, but it's also a politic, and it's also about politics, like we mentioned previously with our discussion. So on conclusion, like I mentioned, for me, it's very important to demonstrate to our partners that we have rule. And about the question I think that it's very
maybe
important.
in 1 or 2 sentences, please.
Yes, very quickly. The European Union is based on some values, and we have some ambition, especially now with the Green Deal, digital aspect, and it's very important to be coherent. And trade is a part of the solution, and we need to be coherent, and we need to be credible. So it's why, for me, it's very important that we have new instruments, and our goal is to defend our interest, to defend our ambition, and to defend our objective. So it's why I think that, of course, we don't want to change all our partners, but our partners, they don't have to change us also. And I think that it's very important to keep in mind this aspect.
Thank you very much. Mr. Roćen, if you want to take 1 or 2 minutes, and then we'll give 1 more minute to Denis.
Minute or two is not enough.
Ja sam iz onog starog komunističkog sistema, znate, nas su naučili da pričamo dugo i ubjedljivo i ni o čemu, a kamoli kad imamo o čemu da pričamo.
You know, I come from the old communist system. They taught us to talk long and very convincingly, even if we have nothing to say, and let alone if we have.
Ne znam, ova boja mačke, nešto vidim da je vrlo zainteresovano naše evropske prijatelje.
I see that this color of the cat that I mentioned provoked many responses from our European friends.
Čini mi se da im ne smeta crvena mačka u Pekingu.
I think that you don't mind the red cat in Beijing.
Jer za Kinu je Europska unija najveći spoljnotrgovinski partner.
Because for China, European Union is the largest foreign trade partner.
A za Europsku uniju je Kina na drugom mjestu.
And for European Union, China is in the second position, immediately after the United States.
Čak mislim u prošloj godini da je izbila i na prvo mjesto.
I think last year it had the place number 1 in foreign trade.
Dakle, kod nas nema na Balkanu opasnosti od tih crvenih mačaka.
You know, in the Balkans there is no danger from the red cat.
Ali ima opasnosti one o kojoj je govorio gospodin Radulović.
But there is a danger that Mr. Radulović mentioned. Da
Europska unija zaobilazi finansiranje ključnih infrastrukturnih projekata bez kojeg nema povezivanja niti bržeg uključivanja i integracije Zapadnog Balkana u Europsku uniju.
But there is
zahvalan za to što vi to vidite također iz ugla zemlje članice Europske unije.
But there is a danger that Mr. Radulović mentioned, and that is the danger of European Union tending to avoid financing the great and important infrastructural projects in our part of the world, which ensure connectivity. And without connectivity, without connections, there is no progress. And I would like to thank you in particular for mentioning this and noticing this and understanding this as a person coming from a member state.
Ono što niko nije pomenuo, malo mi je čudno. od naših europskih prijatelja, niko nije pomenuo sveobuhvatni sporazum Europske unije I Kine o investicijama.
And there is something that nobody mentioned from our European friends, and that is a comprehensive agreement between European Union and China about investments.
Pa tamo su instrumenti.
That's where you have the instruments.
Taj sporazum je pred Europskim parlamentom.
That instrument, that agreement is before the European Parliament.
I sad je njegova ratifikacija stavljena na led.
And now its ratification is waiting, it's on the ice.
Znate koja bi bila najgora moguća pozicija za Europsku uniju?
Do you know what the worst possible scenario would be for the European Union?
Da bude američki satelit u američko-kineskom trgovinskom ratu.
To be an American satellite in the American-Chinese trade war.
Znate, nema više ratova, velikih ratova između velikih sila.
You know, there are no more great wars between the great powers.
Sada se vode geoekonomska nadgornjavanja.
Now we have geo-economic rivalry and competition.
Htjeli da citiramo Clausewitza, onda bi mogli reći da je geoekonomija danas nastavak politike drugim sredstvima.
If we want to quote Clausewitz, then we could say that geoeconomy is now just a continuation of geopolitics with different means.
Ali ja sam siguran, dakle, da Amerika I Europa zajedno mogu naći izlaz.
But I am sure that Europe, European Union and the United States can work together to find a way out of this.
A kako I ne bi kad Amerika više investira u Europu nego u sve azijske zemlje zajedno?
And you know, it's normal because the United States invests in Europe more than in all Asian countries altogether.
A Europa više investira u Ameriku 8 puta nego u Kinu I Indiju zajedno.
And Europe invests 8 times more in the United States than in China and India together.
Dakle, postoji put.
So there is a way.
I molim vas, ja sam pozvan ovdje prije svega zbog kineskog kredita I takozvanog dužničkog ropstva, u koji hoće naši zapadni prijatelji da svrstaju Crnu Goru. Zajedno sa Šri Lankom.
Let me say something that I think I was invited here for, and this is the famous Chinese loan for our highway, and the loan which is used by our Western partners to put us into the same category with Sri Lanka as the debtors and as debtor slaves.
Moram da iskoristim ovu priliku I da naše prijatelje na zapadu ubijedim da to nije istina.
Let me use this opportunity to try to convince our friends from the West that it is not true.
Znate, čuveni irski satiričar Jonathan Swift, autor kultne knjige Gulliverova putovanja, znate, on je izmislio jednu zemlju koja ima naziv sastavljen od ovako poređanih slova čije se ime nikad ne može izgovoriti.
You know, there was a famous satire writer, a writer from Ireland, Jonathan Swift, you all heard of him. He wrote Gulliver's Travels, and he invented a country whose name was not possible to pronounce because he just put some letters together, consonants, and you could not pronounce that.
I don't want to cut you off in any way, but we have to come to a conclusion, unfortunately, Mr.
Završavam.
I think this is very
important. I u toj zemlji, znate, kad neko ne govori istinu, ne kaže mu se lažeš, nego govoriš ono što nije.
And you know, in that country, if people don't say the truth, they are not allowed to tell them, you lie. They have to tell him, you are saying something that is not right.
Dakle, nije istina da postoji dužničko ropstvo. Znači, postoje svi instrumenti za finansijsku održivost projekta izgradnje autoputa sa kineskim partnerima u Crnoj Gori.
So, I will tell you, it is not right. There is no debtors slavery in Montenegro. There are all financial instruments to ensure financial stability to finance the loan from the Chinese bank for our highway.
Imamo nadzor iz Europske unije.
And we do have supervision from European Union over this entire project.
Pravljene su analize za najkonzervativnije prognoze. 70% se može obezbijediti od samog autoputa, a svega godišnje iz budžeta treba izdvajati 20 miliona eura. A to može svaka prosječna kompanija, a kamoli jedna država.
All the analyses were made. And the most conservative scenario says that when you take the tolls, collect the tolls from the highway, you cover 70% of the annual installment to repay the credit. And you only have to cover 20 million from the budget. That is something that a small country can cover. And if it's less European Union in the Balkans, we will always have more China and more Russia. You have to accept that.
A very important
we need Germany.
Thanks. And I'm sure we could continue a lot on many of these topics. I'm just bound by the rules and the need for this room for some of the next panels and the next points on the agenda. Denis Redonnet had the chance, in any case, to say on both questions, say something on both questions. So I'm very sorry, but wouldn't come back to you now at this point. But thank you very much to each and every one of you on the panels. Denis Redonnet, Marie-Pierre Vedrenne in Brussels at the Commission and Parliament, Peter Potman in The Hague at the Foreign Ministry, Wolfgang Niedermark from BDI, and Mr. Roćen from Montenegro. Thank you very much to all of you. And I'll just say quickly, at ECFR, we work quite a bit on this topic. If you want to check out our reports, we've worked with a task force of European governments and private sector actors on different instruments, one of them being this deterrent instrument and what they could look like, and also what they might not, what challenges they might bring and difficulties they might bring. With this, and thanks to my two colleagues, and especially our hosts from the Bled Strategic Forum, thank you very much for this discussion. I think we'll continue informally, but the panel is closed. Thank you very much.